Okay, so today we're gonna talk about how to be the best buyer and the best seller and how to get to the closing table unscathed. Now, this is coming from your girl who always wanted to be a teacher's pet. I say always wanted to be because I talk too much. I would like to report back to all my teachers that I do indeed get paid for talking. I'm not gonna cut this, I'm gonna roll with it. But anyway, all right, so let's just talk a little bit about what you should be looking for when you see a home. Now, when you're interviewing your agent, talk to them. I'm not telling you what it sounds like I'm telling you. They don't need to be a home inspector. They don't need to know everything about homes, but you do need an agent that's informed. Why? When you're walking through the home, you want your agent to be able to point out things that could be a hazard. Now, when I say hazard, I don't mean don't buy the home. It's $10,000. The seller has to fix it, but just things to know, especially if you start to look at older homes. And when I say these things, don't get all alarmed. Like my parents' home, I walked into it a few years ago and I noticed that their hardwood floors, like nobody else would notice it, but they were just pushing up a little bit. So I said to my dad, hey, here's somebody you need to call. You might have just slightly elevated moisture readings under your home. We see this a lot with wood floors. He called him, sure enough, couple $100, put in a dehumidifier, no big deal. Obviously, perk of having a daughter as a realtor. But those are the kind of things you want to be looking for when you go through a home. Now, why do I tell you this? I hear this all the time and it blows my mind. I hear buyers talking about conversations with their agents and just buyers in general, and they'll say, oh, we love this home and there's definitely some stuff we saw and we'll figure it out during the home inspection. So let's talk about this just a little bit. If you've not done the math, an inspection is based on the size of the home for one. So inspections might be $375, they might be $650, and that's just your entry-level inspection. Now, most people learn everything they need to know during an entry-level inspection, but depending upon other systems in the home, or if the home's older, or if something hasn't been inspected in a long time, you might do more inspections. I had an inspection the other day and the buyer did the initial inspection, and then as a result of that, they did about $2,000 worth of other inspections. Now, here's where I'm going with this story. It would be great if you knew up front if the seller would do some things, okay, before you spent that much money, because yes, you can get out of the contract, and people say that all the time, but do you want to have spent that amount of money to find out you aren't going to be able to move forward on this home? So when you're walking through a home with your agent, things you're going to be talking about will be under the house. If there isn't under the house, you might be buying a home built on a slab, or it might be new construction. Things in the attic, the roof, the things in the home that could be expensive, like the roof, like the heating and cooling system, deferred maintenance things that honestly, do they really matter? Maybe not to everybody. Maybe the wood trim isn't perfect. Stuff that you walk in and out of, doors all the time you never notice. Okay, they're gonna come up on your home inspection, but the reality is you probably walked in 20 homes this week that were just like that and you never noticed, and the homes are standing and they're fine, right? But you're looking for these things because maybe when you make your initial offer, you're gonna have your agent talk to the listing agent and they're gonna say something like, so we've already noticed this and this. Does the seller know about this thing? Do you think they'd be willing to talk about it? Do you think they'd be willing to work on it? Or, hey, we just figured out the roof is really at the end of its life. And so before we make an offer, we don't want the seller to feel like this is a bait and switch. Is the seller even gonna be willing to address this? Because sometimes you'll find sellers who know they don't want to, but if they have to, they will. And then you have other sellers who are like, I don't care what happens, I'm not going to do this. So if you're dealing with that second seller, do you even need to go under contract? Do you even need to pay for inspections to find out what you already know, what your agent already knows, only for the seller to say, no, I'm not gonna address this. Plus, if you're really trying to be the best buyer on the planet, which by the way, being the best buyer gets you the best terms, sellers don't wanna have a bait and switch. Now, if you've never heard of a bait and switch, what that means is you present one thing you're gonna do, but then you act a totally different way in the transaction, which is oftentimes what happens in our market. In fact, we're still back in a market where, I say we're still back, we are in some ways going back to a market where we have bidding wars. It's not every home all the time, but it's still a lot of homes. And so buyers really want to win the deal and they make these great offer terms and then they go under contract. And whether they have buyer's remorse for winning the deal or whatever the case may be, they instantly start to kind of undo the terms that they've offered to the seller. They're looking at ways to get things from the seller because they feel like we've offered you a lot. Now we need to figure out how to get something back from you. So when you're able to make an offer that's informed, where you know about the home, one, you're less likely to have to pay money and then get out of the deal, but two, you can already start having these scripted conversations with the seller so they're not surprised and you're not surprised. Also, so you don't agree to way overpay for a home only to find out a seller's not gonna do things, because maybe in those situations, you just make a different offer and you're okay with it, you're paying less for the home, whether that affords you the ability to deal with this later, or you just feel better getting the home because the seller's not going to address these things. All right, but let's talk about something even more important, and that's how to be an ideal seller. So there's this document that every seller has to fill out. Very, very, very few exceptions for when you don't fill this out. Like, people used to think if I'm an investor or if this is an estate sale, I don't have to fill it out. Not true. Only in like rare situations, like sadly a husband and wife own a home together, they get divorced, they don't have to fill out a disclosure because they're just passing the home along to someone who's been living in it. Like, that's how rare it is that you don't fill one out, okay? But the seller's disclosure statement, now let me explain this to you, and let me also lead with a quick disclaimer on my end. I am not allowed to tell you how to fill this out. You must consult with an attorney if you are confused, but the front page tells you a couple of things. The goal of this document is first to disclose anything that is currently wrong with the home. If you check yes, that means yes, we currently have a problem with this thing or this system. If you check no, it means no, we don't. And no representation, everyone thinks that means I don't know. That means I'm not telling you, okay? So that could create some fear and doubt for the buyer, as you might imagine. All right, now, the rule of thumb again, it says explain anything that's wrong. Like, do you have a water leak somewhere? Is your plumbing like going south? No pun intended. Is your electrical working? Are there any major structural things that have happened to your home that aren't good, that are bad? Is your roof leaking? All that kind of stuff, right? When I talk to sellers casually, I'm like, the rule says disclose what's wrong. But also, what you don't want is to not disclose something, even if maybe you fixed it, but then your buyer finds out. And the reality is, buyers are told that sellers are only supposed to be disclosing things that are currently an issue. But just about every buyer I've ever worked with, when they find out something later, even if it's not a current problem, they say, why didn't the seller tell me? Now, even the best buyer's agent can give 101 reasons why and say it's not currently an issue and they took care of it and they don't currently have any issues. They can even say there are no issues with this system at this time in this house. But unfortunately, now we have a trust gap with the buyer, and bridging the gap in a trust gap, once it starts, is very, very difficult. So I'm gonna tell you a couple of cautionary tales. So I recently had this client, the one I mentioned, that did really probably more than $2,000 worth of inspections. Now, to be fair, I'm talking on both sides of the story. I represented the buyer. I truly believe that the seller was intending to be honest, okay? They bought the home from someone who said that there was a 30-year shingle on the home. They were told that the roof was a particular age. They didn't put the roof on, so to the best of their ability, without doing any major digging, they thought they correctly disclosed the age of the roof. They also put the disclosure they had removed a hot tub. Not a lot of information about it, just that they moved a hot tub. So we go through the house, everything's great. My client's in a bidding war. They make a strong, clean offer. Now, coincidentally, this home was under contract before with another buyer, and they had done an inspection. So to our benefit, we got to see the summary report from that inspection. And there was also another report that we got to see as well that buyer did. So we already got to see kind of a peek behind the screens. So my clients felt like, all right, we know based on what they told us about the roof that it should maybe be at half of its life. We should have more than 10 years left with it. The heating and cooling system will probably have to address, and then these other items in the report. But overall, we have a sneak peek into this home and we're ready to move forward. So they made a great offer and they got the home. Well, they decided to do a bunch of inspections, even though it had already been inspected, which was fine. And I'm glad they did, because one of the inspections was a roof inspection where they learned that the seller was not, I think, intending to be dishonest again, but it wasn't a 30-year shingle, it was a 20-year shingle, and guess what? It's been 20 years. As they took a closer look at it, actually the roof needed to be replaced. So now we have a major issue because the buyer wasn't really intending to ask the seller for anything, and we had told them that, but we weren't thinking that we were gonna be replacing an $11,000 or $12,000 roof either. That wasn't part of their budget, it wasn't part of their plan. So we already had to negotiate that into the deal, and we finally got it resolved to where the seller agreed to replace the roof. They did not like it, they were not happy, they felt like the buyer was just bamboozling them, but they finally conceded because they understood it was old. They didn't know, we didn't know, but now we have to manage this. So fast forward, there was another time later in the transaction where we had to have another inspection. And the short version of the story is what was told to them by the original inspector was a little bit different that was told to them at the start of the transaction. Now, tomato, just mincing a few words, but it was downplayed a lot in the beginning. So now there's a second time where the buyer feels like, I don't know if I can trust the seller. So fast forward, we're like 2 weeks outside of closing. They're casually, the buyers, talking to friends, and they're like, it's so cool, this house has a hot tub. What's crazy is I don't even know how they found these old pictures, because usually when you list a home, the pictures that you find online are the current pictures of the home, but they were somehow looking at the pictures from like 2 sales ago. And so the buyer's like, no, there's no hot tub. These owners removed it. And they're like, oh, that's crazy. But the buyer says, but let me see the picture of the hot tub. So this isn't just like a normal hot tub that's like dropped down in a room. It is built into the floor. So obviously the wheels start turning. This is in the sunroom. And they text me and they're like, Tammy, so they removed that, but they don't have anything in the disclosure that we saw that talked about any structural work that was done by a contractor. So we would just like to find out if it was done correctly and how it was done, because obviously it was a big old hole in the floor that took up 75% of the room. Sure, let me ask. Thankfully, it was taken out by a contractor, but as I was learning about it, the statement to me was, and P.S. by the way, they used a contractor. They made sure they did a great job with it, so there are no structural issues, but to save money, they did not replace the original flooring because it would have been a mess, and there's a rug down. So I read that back and I was like, we didn't replace the original flooring, so there's a rug down. So I was like, all right, so I'm reading between the lines here. What exactly is under the rug? Well, the agent was just telling me what the seller was telling them. He's like, I don't know, let me ask for a picture. So the picture that we received is a 10 by 10 space where the seller is holding up the rug and there's wood. And I'm not talking hardwood floors, I'm talking like the subfloor to the floor. That's gonna be a problem for anybody. And in the seller's disclosure statement, they really should have mentioned that. Now, again, to be fair to the seller, that statement, that document is pretty confusing for a lot of people. And so I do understand they felt like this was cosmetic. For them, it didn't seem like it was a big deal. So they didn't think they were hiding anything. They just thought it's a cosmetic thing. Someone else can put a rug down. We couldn't match the floor. No big deal. It was a big deal for my client. Now here's the sad part. And this is why I say for sellers, share whatever you can share, because sometimes when you break down trust, can't put the genie back in the bottle. They finally actually agreed to replace the flooring for my client. So wins all the way around. But at this point, my client has had too much time to think. And their concern is this: they believe that the seller was innocent. They believe that the seller intended to be truthful. They believe that they said everything they could to the best of their ability. Maybe all that is accurate. But even if they say that, they kept finding things that were discrepancies, and things kept popping up, honestly, in most cases, kind of accidentally. So then they started to think, what if we buy this home and there were other things that the seller didn't know or didn't think to say, and then those things become a burden or a financial consequence for us. So even though we were right at the finish line, even though everything was resolved, they were getting a new roof and new flooring and everything looked great, they decided, I don't want to buy this home because I don't have confidence in what I'm purchasing. So when you're a seller, not only do you want to outline the things that are actually wrong, you can say, hey, this was an issue, but this is how I fixed it. And that's okay. Buyers are not expecting, if they're buying a 20 or 30 or 40-year-old home, that it's perfect. They know something probably happened, but you can say exactly how you fixed it, who the contractor was, and that makes buyers feel good. Here's another example. Recently had a home under contract. Everything went great. The home is perfect. And these people have only owned it for about a year. And they were clients that when they bought their home, they did every inspection under the sun. So they still had all the reports. They had done a lot of good work since they bought it. Everything looked great and checked out. All right, fast forward, we're heading to the closing table. We're just a few weeks away. So buyers are required to get homeowners insurance. So they call their insurance agent. They tell them the address. And through this conversation, the insurance agent says, there have been a lot of insurance claims on this property, including one that was like $15,000. It wasn't an outside water issue, but it was from last year. Now, anytime you say water, if you don't know, other than fire, the fastest way to destroy anything is water. It can wick up walls and damage things and create mold problems and do all kinds of havoc, wreak all kinds of havoc on a home in like milliseconds, all right? But also, if you've ever had respiratory issues or autoimmune issues, you know that there's a major sensitivity to mildew, mold, anything like that. So immediately the buyer's concerned because they know that it's not an outside water intrusion issue like a hurricane, but they know there's some sort of water issue that took place inside the home. So she's wondering, are they covering it up? Is that why the walls are painted dark? Immediately unraveling. She wants to do air quality tests. She wants to hire companies that, we know this is gonna be a problem, but they're gonna wanna cut into the sheetrock to find out what is behind the wall. Has something been happening back behind that wall? So through this quick discussion with the other agent, I'm immediately like, can you ask the seller, do they know about anything? Because nothing is in the seller's disclosure statement. Well, again, that seller being honest says, hey, I thought I was just supposed to list anything that was currently wrong with the home. This is already done. In fact, it was covered by our insurance policy, which we know. So still my buyer is spiraling out because they say, so sorry we didn't say it, we took care of it. The check was sent right from our company to the other company. So we're like, well, who is the other company? Again, my client is still spiraling. Once we finally got all the documentation, we found out that this is a massive mitigation, but the good news is they had ripped out all the sheetrock. It was a major demo, replaced flooring, toilet, sinks, everything under the sun. So with that being the case, my client could rest assured that there wasn't anything hiding behind the walls because they were all new walls. But if the seller had just told them this initially, we would not have gone down this path. The buyer was already thinking through, what do we need to have them do? How are we gonna renegotiate? Should we stop packing up our stuff now? Are we still gonna close on time? They are already going down this dark path of unraveling out of the transaction. So as a seller, the more you can explain about the history of your home, the better position you're going to be in. Buyers naturally don't trust a seller and sellers naturally don't trust a buyer. So the more information and the more communication on the front end, when buyers share and sellers don't feel bait and switched, and when sellers share and give all kinds of information, both parties can stay on the same page, and that's what gets you to the closing table and everybody's happy.